All right.
That's good.
It's good, my people. Welcome to right before this little segment where we get into some topics and maybe some issues that are going on right here in this world. Today with me, I got, of course, no one other than our pastor, Pastor Mike.
Thanks for having me on here, Damien. I'm in the hot seat.
In the hot seat.
I'm a
You know,
little
we ready to get it
nervous.
going. Ain't no need to be nervous. But without further ado, we're gonna get right into it. Appreciate y'all. So, Pastor, of course, there's been a lot going on recently here in America. There's always a lot going on in America,
That's right.
first of all. But I want to discuss what's been going on, the events of this past week. Sadly, we had what was it, 8 people I think
Yep.
that had lost their lives in this shooting. This man walked into a spa and killed these people. And I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, Initial thoughts, it's a tragedy. Anytime lives are taken unjustly without reason, it's a tragedy. And so, first and foremost, my heart goes out to the Korean community because I believe the, the victims were Korean. And so there's so many different layers to it when you dealing with this anti Asian hate that's on an uptick. I think it's 150% uptick in anti-Asian hate between New York, my home state, and Los Angeles, because there's a large population of Asian people within those different locations. So when you look at that, and of course, some of the rhetoric that we heard from the previous administration kind of brought that up. And so this is one of those situations where when everybody said, when the previous administration, when everybody talked about the pandemic, called it the Kung flu or the Chinese flu, people talked about, hey, this could have some real detrimental ramifications on a particular community because, of course, hate speech does that. And so we now look and we see, well, this is what everyone talked about, and it's such a tragedy. And then when you start peeling back more of the layers, where you start dealing with misogyny because they were all women, and then the killer had some kind of fetish when it came to Asian women, like there's this thing called the geisha complex. I'm learning a little bit more about it in the past couple of days. So there's so many layers to this issue. But just as a general statement, just from a human perspective, it's a tragedy, man, to just hear so many people just senselessly killed. So, yeah, it's unfortunate.
Of course, and I send my thoughts and prayers out to the family, and of course, rest in peace to everybody that lost their lives. But man, you hit it right on the head. It's a tragedy, and I had seen something right earlier this week Trevor Noah, he had spoke on it, and what he had said was, America's one of the only well, not only, but America's a place where they see something that's about to happen, but yet they don't do anything about it. And when it happens, they try to act surprised.
Sure.
And with that, it's like, man, this is a process we've seen over and over and over again. So what I want to ask next is like, how do we, what is it that people can do or start to change in order to get to these people before something like that can happen?
Man, great question. Great question. And there's layers to that question as well. But I think one of the biggest things we have to do as a society is be honest about our society. So too often when situations like this happen, we tend to make it a one-off. Or we say, like, for example, we talked about this before we came on about how they described the shooter as he was just having a bad day. You know, trying to, of course, retaining his humanity. And we're Christians, so we believe that all of us are in the image of God, right? But you have these situations where we take these circumstances as it's just a one-time thing or an isolated incident, as opposed to viewing our society for what it is. America was founded on racism. America has this racial issue constantly steeped in the dynamics of this country. So the first thing we can do in terms of a society is be honest about that reality. Because you cannot successfully solve a problem if you don't know a problem exists. If you just make it isolated to this individual, then the next thing will probably happen is it'll shift to be a political conversation, maybe about gun rights and things of that nature. But at its core, what we're seeing is, again, the remnants of the white supremacy, the racism that is steeped into this country. And so once we start addressing that real reality and start saying, how do we work from that? And of course, you know, we come from a Christian perspective, so the love of Christ ultimately heals those wounds, but we have to be honest about that. And we have to look at our systems that have this racism engulfed in it and start to peel back how we deal with it. But I think so I'll just repeat. I think the first thing is being honest about where we are as a country, and then beginning that work to start to rectify and change our situation.
Yeah, of course, and I definitely agree with you. My grandparents actually this morning, they were talking about the whole situation, not to go off track, but I want to relate it to this. They were talking about what had happened with Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan, and that whole situation with, I think it was, I forgot the lady's name, but it was on the View, and the ladies that got into it talking about whether it was racist or not, right? And then,
the Sharon Osbourne.
Yeah, of course, that situation. But another thing is that the people that, I don't know who's all in the royal family or whatever, but the person who had made them comments there, a lot of times my grandparents have said those people, like our white brothers and sisters, don't realize a lot of some of the things they may be doing are racist. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe they think, oh, I don't have a problem with black people. I don't mind if they come around. But then they have habits and mindsets and subconscious motives that develop over time if not addressed. So of course, agreeing with you with what you just said, that's a big problem. Part of it is addressing the reality of where it is we stay. So another thing I want to say is we see, like you were saying, the Kung Flu, whatever, they make these little jokes and all them kind of things. I just want to ask you, like, how critical is it for people to understand where these kind of seemingly harmless jokes can go?
So a lot of what is done, like critical race theory is one, but people have written on this for years, just about how language and how particular language it can be hateful and can cause violence. We know, of course, with the use of the N-word, you and I both hate that word, and you know, we could have a conversation on whether we should or shouldn't. That's a different conversation for another day. But we know there was historically that word had a lot of violence attached to it. And still to this day, there is a lot of violence that attached to it. So I think people need to be more mindful of how language actually affects real people's lives. The things that you say, you know, the saying was always, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. No, words actually hurt probably more than and sometimes the stick or the stone.
Yeah,
And so we say words shouldn't hurt as somewhat of a way to minimize their impact. Words actually have impact. So when you can say certain things that will stereotype or demean a whole community, and then of course everyone assumes that. Me being from New York, we had a situation, everybody knows 9/11 happened, and in our city we have a large immigrant population, particularly from the Middle East, and we know what happened when some of the rhetoric started to go around. Then it became so ingrained within our particular society, probably in America in large, but particularly for New York City, you see anybody that quote unquote has the look of a Middle Eastern, and now you think that they're part of the Taliban or part of Al Qaeda, and because of that, you act towards them aggressively. So this is, again, what happens with language. And so the things that we say in jest, because now it's one of those things, Damien, where it was like a year or two ago, people were laughing about something, and I just said, because I felt to myself, I was like, listen, man, not everything is funny. Like, everything is not a joke. And too often, social media and all of these different platforms have made everything a joke. And the things that you laugh at are the things that someone else cries about. And so there's a lot of pain that's attached to this, and violence that actually could be attached to it. So I just think we all need to be more mindful. Of course, we're Christians, so Jesus tells us, love your neighbor as yourself. So the things that you say to your neighbor or about your neighbor could actually have real life consequences, and we're seeing it now.
Of course. And that's like it's a very relevant thing, especially now. I see it every day. I'm still in high school, right? And exactly what you just said applies every single day. I see it. A lot of kids my age, excuse me, they don't take a lot of these things that go on in this world as seriously as they say I do. And I'm not saying maybe that's the way it should be, but I would think that if you have something that you know affects somebody in such a way that it's detrimental to their mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual health, I wouldn't harp on that and try to make that as a joke, because then you have people who go through these emotions and things like that in a home and develop all type of mental and emotional issues because you got somebody that's not willing to even consider that.
That's right.
In a place. And also, going to relate this to cancel culture. Let's talk about it. We got this going on, right? Of course, we have to understand, like you said, jokes can go too far, and there's certain things we don't joke about.
Sure.
But there's two sides to every storm. We got to look at the other side of it too. We got a lot of things going on now. Like, of course, you saw Space Jam, right? They took off certain characters, like the little skunk or whatever, because he was I forgot the word, but he was overly attracted or aggressive towards women. I'm not saying that that's wrong or whatever, but like relating it back to this, where do we draw the line for cancel culture? Because you have so much that gets overdone with it. So where does that line get drawn?
Man, powerful question. Man, I didn't even know Space Jam came out already, man.
No, not yet. It comes out later, the Space Jam 2, but I was looking at the news on it.
Oh, okay. Oh, and that's what they were talking about?
Yeah, they already took that character off. They took another one off.
Pepe Le Pew?
Yeah, Pepe Le Pew.
Oh,
they took another character. Yeah.
Oh, man, they taking characters.
Yeah, they canceling old shows and things like that.
My man, to be just quite honest with cancel culture, and I was talking to someone about this maybe 2 weeks ago. Like, we've gone too far with cancel culture. Do you ask where's that line? There isn't one. The line's been blown up. It's like if you do anything wrong, we getting you the culture saying we getting you out of here.
Okay.
Like, it's the same thing with like the whole situation with Kirk Franklin. Culture, like, we ready to get you out of here. One mistake and we get you out of here. And
that's a whole nother conversation.
I think it's just like, I think we have created a space where some of the most insidious behavior is now allowed and accepted. And of course, listen, man, we're Christians. We're going to look at it from a biblical context. And God talked about in the last days, the bad will be good and the good will be bad. So for some strange reason, it's cool to like say I'm canceling people. Like that's the it thing to do, to say, up, you make one mistake, we cancel you. There's no redemption, there's no nothing. And there are things that people can do that there are degrees to everything, right? So certain things have a degree. I know, remember when Kanye said, slavery was a choice, we was ready. I'm not gonna lie. I was one of the people that was ready to say, let's get him out of here.
All on Kanye's head.
Let's get him out of here. Because in terms of cancel culture, I was like, nah, you got to go, bro, because that's offensive to our whole community and our ancestors that came before us that fought for you to be able to have a platform to say that. That's disrespectful to them. So I understand it to some degree where people like saying, well, let's cancel people because I understand it from that standpoint of like, it's a new day. Certain things you used to say, you can't say anymore. So like people, all this thing, like, people pull up people's tweets from when they was younger. Bro, if people pulled up tweets of things I've said when I was younger, oh man, there's no way I'd be a pastor or anything. Like people would get me out of here. So I understand that aspect of being mindful, like we said, talking about the things that you say and being mindful of the words you say. But it is to the point where we are saying we're not giving anyone redemption for anything. We're like canceling you out the gate. Any mistake is over for you. And I just think that's extreme. And we do have to find the line. To your question, we do need to find that line.
And I would say, like, just to further even that, like you said about Kanye, like, I get that. Like, what he said, slavery was a choice, that's a big blow to our African-American community, especially you being a part of it. Why would you say that?
Right.
But I think a bigger thing we could do, instead of trying to cancel it and say, oh, you done with forever, why don't we try to redirect or put my brother on the right path instead of trying to cut him from a path at all?
That's right.
And that's another thing. I see that. And what's crazy to me is that you got cancel culture and all that stuff going on, but then I feel like sometimes they address the smallest things, right? The littlest things to harp on, but the biggest issues, everybody's like, okay, we're going to look left and focus on all these other little small things going on.
That's right.
But moving on, though, we're going to talk, like, what I want to ask about next, excuse me, I want to say, like, of course, you got this dude, right? This dude, this man, he's a white man, of course, goes into this place, kills these people. And then we're not new to this. We know this being a part of the black community, of seeing all this long history of people that are just committing offenses against our community, but get excuses made for them. Yeah. What is the deal with this? Like, why we seeing a dude go in here and kill all these people, right? And then he had a bad day.
Yeah, right. I've never had a bad day like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've never had a bad day. I've never had no bad day like that where I kill 8 people because you're having a bad day. Like, no. It goes back to our earlier point where we talked about if we're honest about our society and we're honest about the America. Remember, this is the America that had, for 246 years, had chattel slavery. Yeah. Treated people that look like me and you as not human and just cattle, right? And so then you had 100 years of Jim and Jane Crow. Then you have mass incarceration going on now, and you still have redlining, all of the things that you talked about beautifully a couple of weeks ago on the right before. So we have that in. So you're talking about this year, it'll be 402 years since the first slave comes here in 1619. That is the history of America, the history we don't talk about. We could wax poetically about George Washington, but we should also remember that George Washington owned slaves, right? So this is the America we're in. So now when you walk into this kind of America where one group had decided that they are the superior group and therefore every other group is inferior, then you fast forward to today and you have a situation where we can retain and restore the humanity of an individual who just killed 8 people. And we can pretend as if that's somehow normal, but it's almost funny that is America. And so sadly, that is a normal America. Mass shootings, I think we have the most mass shootings. Statistically, we're at the top. Everybody.
And it's not even close. Like, next.
So we're always having mass shootings, and it tends to be a white guy with a bad day. So, but it's not a bad day. It's the culture of this country, and until we are until we're okay and able to speak to that reality, the reality of white supremacy, the reality of racism in America, until we're able to walk to that, then when this happens again, because it will, we'll continue to keep doing this little cycle, this little reel of saying, well, it was just a bad day, well, it's a one-off. When are we going to start to look ourselves in the face as a country and say, hey, we have an actual problem, and this problem has been sitting here for 400 years. At some point, we have to address it. Because even before the African slaves get here, the indigenous people had to go through all of the racism and being slaughtered. So this is part of America. So we have to start speaking honest about it and saying what is going on with it. Not what is going on. We know exactly what's going on. How do we address it?
Yeah, and it makes me wonder a lot of times what would differ if America was largely, the population was largely indigenous, or how do we say this? The population was largely the people of minorities. So what if the minority was the majority? I often wonder at times what America would be like. I had to think about that a lot. But also, looking at that in the whole Bad Day reference, we see a lot of times like this dude went in there, came out perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I didn't see not one scratch on him. Kyle Rittenhouse, I think that's the one that did that up in what was it? What was that? Right after the protests, he went and shot the people at the protest. And then you had Dylan Roof. Got the Burger King.
Right.
It blows my mind. No, it doesn't. I'm lying, y'all. I'm sorry. I just lied. God forgive me. I am not surprised at all.
That's right.
That's what I really mean to say. But I'm not even gonna say that. What really just infuriates me, that's what I will say.
Yeah.
What gets me heated is when I see this over and over again. Sure. But somehow we got a George Floyd, or we got we got a Jacob Blake constantly over and over and over again. And because of that, I want to ask you, I actually wrote an essay about this earlier this week for English. I wrote about the foundation of policing and what it is we have in our criminal justice system.
Right.
What needs to change in order to address that and make it an equal system that addresses everyone's criminal offenses the same?
So it's a layered question, my friend. There's so many ways to go to it, because there's a lot of streams of thought as it relates to police reform and police abolition. And there's a distinction between those two. Of course, reform means to change what's already existing. Abolition means to do away with it. And so I've often seen myself or viewing the issue of policing, given that history of policing, as reform, but then I'm starting to lean more towards abolition, in the sense of viewing a world where you do not need the over-punitive policing. People talk about community policing is one example, but I do recognize the importance of having a structure in place, like a checks and balances, so to speak, as it relates to the way we do policing in America. But a lot of things need to change. One of the things we have to have is, and people have been talking about this for years, is having the police within the community reflect the community. So too often you have police operating within a community that are not from the community they're working in. So, for example, if I were a police officer in this community where my church is, where I'm connected to people here, then if I see little Jimmy down the block doing something wrong, I'll say, little Jimmy, cut it out before I call your mother. It's a personal relationship now where it exemplifies this community policing versus I'm from another community. I don't know anyone in this community. I don't know the dynamics of the community. I'm just here as an occupying force. And too often that's what police are, especially in our communities. They're occupying forces where, like, I'm from New York, so we have beat cops. So beat cops are 2 by 2 on each corner. So they're standing on each corner, and it's almost like you're in a prison, and these are the COs in the prison. They're just hovering over you. While you're walking in to go get to the grocery store, there's 2 police officers standing on the corner. This already creates a level of tension and intimidation on the part of police. So we have to do away with a lot of those archaic policing. As part of why we did it, why it was done in New York, is this theory of broken windows policing. So you over police the small things so that to avoid the bigger cracks. It's like a window. If it has a small crack, you deal with the small crack so you don't avoid the big crack. This kind of concept. So a lot of but of course it was racial in a lot of the way it was like stop and frisk. There's a lot of, the Supreme Court determined that it was racist. Stop and frisk. So a lot of what policing is has to be adjusted and completely changed, and that's why in a lot of ways, you may look at it as ending up policing being abolished, and we coming up with another system.
Yeah, and that's what I was writing. I think I got to the point ultimately because as I write my essays, I try to I self-reflect while I'm writing my essays. Of course, they tell you to start off with a thesis, your main point.
That's right.
That usually ends up changing some point in time as I'm writing my essay because it's especially developing along the lines of something that's so complex like that has multiple layers. I have to look back at it, and what I initially started with, oh man, I don't want to be too harsh, I know there's good people that are police officers, but as I look more and more into the system and what it's composed of and the foundation of where it started from, slave catchers are police. It means the same thing.
That's right.
So when they come and they take that same mentality, it may not be infused into the people that are doing it, but when you have the system that's infused with that mentality, the people are just, like you said, an occupying force fulfilling that same purpose that was that was made so many years ago. So moving on as we get towards the end here, I want to say there's a lot we just covered, the dude that went and did that, the cancel culture, and of course the police and everything that ties in between. But we have to look at our place as Christians and of people of God's community. Where do we fit into that equation, and what's our part? Where do we play, and what is it our responsibility to do?
Well, great, man. You wrote these questions down, man? These are phenomenal questions, man. What you doing, man? Just trying to take my job, man. See what you're doing. But no, it's a great question. In terms of the church has an ugly history in America as it relates to some of these issues with racism.
Stand by.
We have a checkered past, and so there's a lot of work that we can do as a church. But just to be honest, when you asked that question, the first thing that I thought was we have to be right in the middle. So the church has to be in the middle of these issues, because these are community issues. And I often say, we exist as a church to support our community. That's the only reason why we are here, is to be, God's hands and feet. We're supposed to be spreading light through the world. So that means in these issues of racism and these issues of misogyny, sexism, the people of God have to have a voice. And we have to start talking, but not only just speaking, but acting. So there are many things that we have to be involved in, getting involved with local organizations, talking more going to our local police, trying to bridge that gap if we can, just being more actively involved in the uplift and the positivity, because too often we have either been actively and outwardly complicit, or we've just been silently complicit. So we say nothing, and your silence speaks volumes. So now is the time for us as a church to say, okay, this is a moment where people need God. People need the answer. We know that answer. The answer is Christ. But we have to, in addition to saying it, we have to show it. And we have to exemplify that compassion that Christ showed because he was with all the people that, all the issues that were happening. James Cone talks about, the famous a black theologian, and talks about black liberation theology, and he talked about pretty much if Christ were here today, he would be one of the oppressed. That's the group he would more identify with, because that's what you always saw him with the oppressed. You always heard him talk about the poor and the least of these. And so that's where we have to go as a church. We have to, if there's oppression, that's where we should be, because that's where Christ will be, trying to help. So that's where I think the church has to go to next.
Of course, and I completely agree with that. That's our responsibility as God's children to help out our fellow brothers and sisters and be right there in the middle and taking care of everything that we see going on. Because as long as there's a problem with it, whether it's in our hearts and our minds or in our spirit, it needs to be addressed by us in this community. And another thing I wanted to say, of course, with that, I wrote I had to read an essay earlier this year. I had a English teacher, shout out Coach Goodlow, is one of the best English teachers in the United States of America, okay? I put that on everything. He had us read this essay, and it was not essay, or letter by Martin Luther King Jr., right? Dr. King wrote it, letter to Birmingham, a letter from a Birmingham jail, right? Yeah. And it's like he is addressing his fellow clergymen, and in that he's imploring them that what you're doing is not of God first and foremost. and your lack of response is your utter response. And that's the complete opposite of what it is we are entitled to do. We are misusing our, how do I say this? We are misusing the gift that God gave you in order to be a part of. And I think, like, just going along with that and seeing everything else that goes on, it's so important and critical to remember that.
That's
but
right.
how much more time we got on here real quick?
We done, man.
Got a minute? Okay, cool. Well, since we
man.
got
We
some
got
more
1 minute.
time, got to
Got
make
1
sure
minute.
we taken care of. But since we got some more time, I'll throw this one out here at you real
Yeah.
quick, Pastor. Looking at all these things that's been going on, right? This past week, of course, Kyle, like all these things, I wanted to ask you too, moving forward, what is a place for us to start? Not just the church, not just the community, but what is a place for us to start as African American people in order to help others that we see, not just Asian community, not just Hispanic community, everybody. What's somewhere we can get straight to the point at and just use it as a way to open up other opportunities and really just break open this foundation and put a new one.
Okay. Here you go again with these great questions, man. You was prepared, man. Good for you. Man. Well, in addition to giving your life to Christ first, that's the main thing, because that's what really will open your mind and open your heart to these to addressing some of these issues. But the main thing, I see myself as it relates to the movement, so to speak, and liberation of our people. I see the importance of education. So the first thing you need to do is be educated. Learn more about the history of this country, why we got here, why are we in the situation we're in now. Find that history out. Start diving deeper, because the beauty of history and learning about it, it changes your life, and you'll never be the same after. And it will inform the way you act when you start to see certain things happening. It will begin to dictate your movements as you operate in a society that is rife with some of these social ills. So the first thing and the most important thing is to be educated. Read more books. In addition to reading your Bible, read historic books. There's a great book called The Half Has Never Been Told, American Capitalism, Slavery and American Capitalism. It's a phenomenal book. That's a great book to read. There's a bunch of books I could give you to read, but for our community, but for people in general. Get educated more, because as we talked about earlier, too often we dismiss these acts of violence as just a one-off, and we don't look at the larger picture. But reading and studying and educating yourself on the issues in America gives you this clear vision of the larger picture, and then it helps you with how to address it.
Of course. And I completely agree with you. I think that's an excellent point to look at. Also, another thing is you got how do I say this? Just give me 1 second. All right, we back. when we see these things going on, right, and we look at the whole educational aspect of it, you have to be willing to accept what it is you're being told. Maybe not about yourself, but about your community. I think a lot of times we have people who are so hard-headed that they get that information, they're like, nope, not even gonna look at that.
Right,
because if it's anything that offends me or makes me feel like there's something wrong with myself, I refuse to address it.
That's right.
And I just want to, I don't even know what to ask, like, in terms of what can they do or who I can do to change that about myself. But what are some things I can practice to be able to accept whatever it is about myself that's maybe hurting myself, my community, or people from other communities?
Oh, okay. So more so, like, what happens when you're confronted with the realities of your situation?
Whether I'm brought it by information that I've read or someone else presents that information to me.
Well, that's one of the most, it's difficult to hear some things that are sobering about who you are and your circumstance. But my real answer to that is when you see the beauty of accepting Christ as your Lord and Savior is that God explains to you the frailties and the faults that you have within yourself. And because God is so good, God is the good, the great, that your weakness is his strength is made in your weaknesses. So the more you see how weak you are, the more you recognize how strong God is.
Exactly.
And so that is really how you come to this point where you start to see these weaknesses and you say, man, or for example, man, I got these racial issues. I don't really like black people. But then you start to see that God said everybody's in the image of God. Everybody's in my image. So in fact, the person that has darker skin, more melanin than you, they're my child just like you are. So I love them so much, and you start to see that and say, oh, well, maybe that means I can love them a lot more too. That's part of what you gain when you get to this position, and so that'll help you as you go into learning more and hearing more about yourself. Christ will be able to reveal it to you, but you'll see how strong he is through you.
Oh man, thank you, Pastor. That's a powerful response, and it's just relates and reminds us how important it is to make God a integral part of our lives.
That's
he
right.
has to be who we go to for our problems, whether it be ethnicity wise, spiritually wise, or any other wise. I think moving forward that just obviously America could use a little more Jesus. What that song saying every single day, because I think if people use those same things that we talk about here in the church, you apply those same laws and those same emotions and properties, then a lot of these problems can be avoided completely, because you get to the person before they even have a chance to make that kind of decision. Because before, and then it gets engraved in their mind too. I also want to ask, like, moving forward from this point in time, like you said.
You gotta go.
Oh, we gotta go.
Man.
For sure. I'm sorry. I didn't get no signal. My fault, y'all.
It's all good, man.
My fault.
So
I'm
let
waiting
this
on
be
the time thing. Okay,
Nah,
but
it's all
look,
good.
we out of time, y'all. I really appreciate y'all being with us. I hope y'all have a blessed Sabbath day. This has been Right Before It. I have my brother Pastor out here with me today.
You already know.
All right. We're blessed. Y'all be blessed and have a fantastic week.